We're going to continue, Mr. Hashem, in our overview of Kodshim. And we were speaking about the concept of Lishma and Shalom Lishma. We spoke about a whole list of 6 different kavanos and intentions that the Kohen should have when he's doing the avodah. Some were critical, some were less critical. And then we spoke about a concept called Stama Lishma, which means that those 2 critical kavanos, like l'shem zevach, l'shem zoveach, he didn't have in mind. He didn't have in mind the wrong zevach or the wrong zoveach, but he had nothing in mind. That's called stama, and that's called stama l'shma. And in such a case, in most karbanos, we're going to be machshir the karban, even if the kohen did not have in mind l'shem zevach, l'shem zoveach. There were 2 karbanos that were exceptions to the rule, and one of them was a karban chatos, and the other karban pesach. So in the cases of pesach and chatos, we will not salvage the validity of the karban just based on stama l'shma, but rather we require an explicit kavana l'shem zevach and l'shem zover. According to one opinion, however, and that's, I think, the last thing that we mentioned before Yom Kippur, we had an opinion that even in the cases of Korban Pesach and Chatos, they are ksherim v'lo olu l'baylim l'shem chov. They're not completely excluded and possible, send it to the Beis HaSreifa, but rather they are valid, but they'll have to be replaced by the Bailim. So if, let's say, he ate chelev b'shogeg and he has to bring korban chatas, and the Kohen had a mistama, he didn't have in mind l'shem zoveach, then the zoveach will have to bring a replacement korban. That's called lo olo l'bayim l'shem chova, but the korban per se is kosher. Other opinions would have it that if the Kohen was absent a positive machshav of l'shem zoveach, the korban chatos now is absolutely possible. Now we get to a different question, which again I think we mentioned right before Yom Kippur, and that is what happens in terms of the mitzvah. Let's say we say that b'di'eved, if the Kohen did not have the machshava, stama l'shma. Is there a chiyuv though, l'chatchila, mitzvah incumbent upon the Kohen to have the machshava l'shma? And that's a discussion between the Karen Ora and other achronim, whether or not we need a verbal declaration on the part of the Kohen, l'shem zevach, l'shem zover. Now we have the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. This, I think, we did not touch on yet. That's at the beginning of Masechet Zvachim on Daf Beis and Beis. And Rabbi Yossi has a principle called Asnu Bezdin Delolema L'Shmo. That Bezdin made a Tanakh that the Kohen should not mention Lishma. He should leave it out. Why? Why would Bezdin make such a Tanakh? Because we're worried about toes. We're worried about mistakes. The Kohen is very preoccupied with bringing korbanos. He might mistakenly declare the wrong declaration. And once he is required to speak out, to enunciate his lishma, then you're getting into, according to Rabbi Yossi, the problem of he may mistakenly mention the wrong zevach or the wrong zoveach, the wrong korban. He'll mention an ola instead of a chatos, etc., etc. So it's better to rely on the ikar din doraisa of stama lishma than to say, well, we want to do it in an ideal way, and the mitzvah is for him to speak out his machshava, make a verbal declaration. No, says Rabbi Yossi, certain cases we would rather avoid the ideal way, we'd forfeit the ideal kiyum for the sake of preventing the multiplicity of psule karbonos. Better if there's no declaration, because once there's a declaration, we have no way of being machshir the carbon if he made a mistake. So to avoid that scenario, we would encourage him to leave it in a mistama situation. Leave as is. The Torah says mistama l'shma, leave it as is. And that's the power of Bezdin. Bezdin has the power to make such a Tanai, and in a sense, what word do I want to use? Neutralize a chiyuv that the Torah imposes, an ideal chiyuv l'chatchila of mentioning and pronouncing the kavan of lishma. That's going to end up in problems. And to avoid the problems of psule karbanos, we would rather drop the ball on that which is ideal. We're going to make a t'nai. Don't mention the specific zevach or zover. Leave it out. Let's fall back on mistamel lishma. It reminds me of a story. They tell a story of a Safek get in Brisk, in the city of Brisk, and Reb Chaim sent a telegram to the Gadol Adar, who was the Ein Yitzchak, Reb Yitzchak Spector, if you heard of him. Anyway, Yitzchak Elchanan, his second name was Elchanan. My second name is also Elchanan. Anyway, Reb Yitzchak Elchanan Spector was the final word in Psak Halach at that time. So the Rav of Brisk, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, he sent a telegram to Reb Yitzchak Elchanan. This is the shaila that we have in Get. And do me a favor, he says, just tell me whether the Get is kosher or not. Don't give me any explanations. As soon as you give me explanations, I'm going to start disagreeing with you and disproving you, and then there will be in a big mess. I'm going to rely on your places, on your shoulders, that you tell me whether the get is kosher or apostle, and that's it. Don't the less you say, the better. Shtika is a siag l'chachma, so that in this case, in our, getting back to our discussion, if you leave out, left more unsaid than what you say, we're better off, because if you start saying something, you might say about a chatas and tzanola or something like that, and it'll get into problems of passing the Korban. That's the shita of Rabbi Yosef. However, there is a shita of the Balei Tosfos, and again, this is all based on the sugya at the beginning of Masechta Zvachim, that l'chatchila we're going to require that he mention the lishma, that he speak it out. And that's what he says here on the bottom of your page, Chav Gimel, Tiknu chachamim shelo yichashiv kein af beliba. Or, Tiknu chacham shelo lomer es hamachshava b'pech, tzorach lachshav kein beliba. The Tosfos wants to say that according to Rabbi Yossi, we go very far. The Takanas Bezdin, the Tanai Bezdin was that he shouldn't even think of Lishma. He should literally do the Avodah without thinking it out. He should come with an empty, we used to call it jughead. Because if you're going to require of him that belibo he has the machshava, then it might passel the korban. His machshavas halev might be problematic. So Tosfos' shita is that the Tanai Bezdin of Rabbi Yossi was shalom lomar b'peh, but he should say it, think it in his mind, in his heart. And he introduces the Likutei Halachos, who says that the takana was that the shelo yachshav b'libo, So who is the shita that he should be choshev b'limo? Of a Rambam pasuk shetzarech lachshav b'limo. That's because the Rambam is rejecting Rabbi Yossi. But again, within the context of Rabbi Yossi of the time Bezdin, it seems that it's almost a unanimous vote that he shouldn't even be choshev b'limo. That's how far this takana goes. But Achronim Kosvu, Shalo Tignu Kain Chachamim El Machsheves L'Shem Zevach L'Shem Zofech Lo B'Shar Machshav. That the other Machshavas, we had 6 on the list, so this is the balance of the other 4, that he should certainly have those Machshavos, but only with regard to the 2 critical Machshavos, which could undermine the status of the carbon, that's L'Shem Zevach L'Shem Zofech. There, Rabbi Yossi insists that they made it tonight. Bezdin, he shouldn't have speak out those much. And this leads us to page Chav Dal. We know that all shchitos subdivide into 2 categories. There's shchitas chulin and shchitas kodshim. And until now, we've discussed a machshava of shalol lishma, where he passes the carbon by having in mind the wrong carbon. Let's say chatos l'shem olam. However, what happens if he has in mind that he's shechting chulin? He thinks that this animal is a behemas chulin. I don't know what it's doing in the Azara, don't ask me. So the mental state, the mindset of the Kohen was that he checked in chulin. Now you and I would say, I think, tell me if you agree with me, that intuitively this should certainly be possible. It's a lot worse than having in mind the wrong kodshim. In this case, he had in mind chulin. But the opposite conclusion could be justified because chulin is like a non-entity. It's totally powerful. In a sense, machshavas chulin is like stama. It's like no machshav at all, because chulin doesn't come into the radar screen. Whereas if he has a machshava of shalol lishma, meaning I know I'm shechting kodshim, but I'm shechting an olo, and in fact it's a chatos, that's problematic. Nifsal ashchita. But now the Gemara is going to come up with a whole nother explanation. This is a Gemara in Tzvachim and Vav, as to why the shchita l'shem chulin in Kodshim is a shchita psula. And that's called misasik. Misasik means that this is not a shchita at all. We completely nullify the shchita. Not because it's shalol lishma. It was l'shem chulin. Not because he undermined the din of lishma, l'shem zevach, like the case where he thought that he's shechting an ola when he's shechting a chatos, etc. No. Forget about all that. There's halacha misasek. Misasek means, imagine, again, it's hard to picture this, but a man is checking out his knife for shchita, and at some point he drops the knife. And what's below him? An animal. And it shechs properly. That's not shchita at all. And that applies to chulin. Forget about kodshim. We're going to just apply it to kodshim by analogy. There's halacha called misasik. Misasik means I was involved in doing one thing, one action, and as a result, inadvertently, another action came out. Something that I didn't even imagine that would happen. Like the case in Bava Kama. It's actually Shalmi. The man went to sleep. Little did he know that during his sleep he would roll over and smash kalim. That's misasik. A man is trying to blow something that stuck into his shofar. So he's cleaning out his shofar, and out comes the tekiah. That's called misasa. Non-awareness of the action. The Sugin Zvachim equates a shchita l'shem chulin in Zvachim with misasa, as if he didn't do the shchita. The fundamental difference, the categorical difference between shchitas kodshim on the one end and shchitas chulin on the other end is so, the gap is so, it's impossible to traverse such a wide gap. It's so fundamentally different that it's not a shchita at all. He's misasa. The shchita of kodshim is a different entity, categorically, than the shchita of chulin. That's the sugya in Masechet Zvachim. And now he quotes the Chafetz Chaim and the Chazon Ish, apparently. I'm not sure the other Achronim disagreed. Gam b'shar avodos posel. Now, wait a second. Shar avodos. Now we're talking about Kabbalas Hadam, Holochas Hadam, Zrikas Hadam. I mean, these have no parallel in Chulin. So above and beyond my problem as to what exactly was he thinking in L'Shem Chulin and Shar avodos, I don't know. Well, let's say we solve that problem. That's more of a technical issue. But conceptually, why is this called misasa? But again, we're going to have to apply the same yardstick, the same reasoning, that if he does it l'shem chulin, it's so radically different than l'shem zevach that it's already misasik. He's not involved in doing the avodah of zrika. What Kabbalah halach? And again, I'm going to say something now that sounds absolutely ludicrous. But if you could say better, please tell me. I think what he's doing is he's receiving the dam, thinking that he's going to take that dam and feed it to his dog or use it as fertilizer for his fields. He doesn't realize that this is dam kodshim. Now again, what's zrika? That already boggles my mind. I can't help you with that. I can't help myself. Well, what would be zrika l'shem chulin? Again, maybe, but this would only be for chayat ofos. It's not going to help for behemoths that there's a din of kisi adam, so he's zorek the dam, and then he's going to be machasa the dam. I don't know. It's not going to help you with the behemoths, so forget it. So I don't know what zrika would be l'shem chulin. I'm not sure what the mitzias is. He does write in a footnote here, Tov Yud Beis, Ha'achiezer tzidei sherak b'shchita posel, which probably means that in Chulin we don't recognize the validity in the halachic world of any of the other avodas other than shchita. There's no Kabbalah, there's no halacha, there's no zrika. That has no parallel in Chulin. So to tell me that he was misasik because he did a zrika l'shem chulin instead of a zrika l'shem kodshim on the mizbeach, and therefore he's misasik, that doesn't make any sense. If the Torah, the halacha recognizes a l'shem chulin in this ma'isa, like in shchita, but again, that's only unique to shchita, then you can talk about misasik. That's the Achiezer.
If they did a korban for a non-Jew, there was no zrika with that, so that he would have, for some reason, he was thinking this was not from, a Jewish korban, that it was a non-Jewish korban.
You're asking an excellent question. I don't think it's relevant to our discussion, meaning as far as we're concerned, he did a Zrika L'Shem Zevach. He thought that the Bailim were a Yisrael instead of a Nachri. So that would be a L'Shalol L'Shman L'Shem Zevach in L'Shem Zoveach. And probably the old issue about Shalol L'Shma would apply. Because by definition, if he has in mind a guy instead of a Jew instead of a guy, that's Shalol L'Shem Zoveach. But I don't think that's relevant to our discussion. That's Zrika, even if he has in mind a guy instead of a Jew, that is his Zrika's Kodshim. That's Zvachim, and that would be valid. But we want to know, is there such a thing as Misasek if he has in mind of a Zrika of Chulin? Sometimes I notice over and over again, it's my limited knowledge that I get stuck with trying to understand the reality. Well, why would such a scenario ever come to the fore? But what I do appreciate is the Achiezer, because he's saying even if Lu Yitzur, the Kohen, for some strange reason, had in mind that it's Chulin, that he's shechting Behem as Chulin, and he's doing a Kabbalah Saddam, L'Shem Chulin, I don't know what that means. But even in the worst case scenario, it's not Misasik, because the Torah doesn't recognize. There is no such legal halachic entity as Kabbalah Saddam L'Shem Chulin in Chulin. There is no Kabbalah Saddam. It's meaningless. If you have a good trained monkey, let the monkey be Makabal in town. What do I care? Again, in a Chaya Nof, I'm going to have to do Kisi Adam. So maybe, I don't know, maybe there's certain methods in which you Kabal Adam in order to do the Kisi Adam. I don't know. Then he says, "Imchishev ha'oved bi'achas mi'arba avodas hakorban shehem shchita v'af b'shchita zar kabbalah holacho zrika machsheves shelo lishma aposeles halacha Nechlak hadin bein sugi hakorbanos korban pesach v'korban chatas hakorban pasul shar korbanos hakorban kosher shel shelo ol lebayil ruz chavosam. V'hoya korban chova tzricha abayim lahavi korban. So it seems to me that this paragraph is just a summary of everything that we learned until now. I don't see offhand any new innovations here. He's saying that the koina oved, he calls it the oved because of shchita could be a zar, and with regard to any of the four avodos, he has a machshavet shalol l'shma. So here's where we break it down. If it's shar karbonos other than Pesach and Chatos, then it's called shalol l'shma, and the carbon is kosher, but lo alu l'bayim l'shem choven. If it's a carbon choven, they'd have to replace it. But in the case of Pesach, or alternatively, the case of Chatos, the carbon is completely possible. Now, what does he say here in the footnotes? I don't know that we need any footnotes. This is just a summary of everything we learned. Let's see, Tov Nun Dal. What's there? Rak v'matana rishona. What's the Kriv Mizbecha? So if I understand correctly, he's saying here in footnote number Taf Nun Dalid that a machshava shalol lishma poseles is only relevant in the case of zrika to the first matana. In other words, you need a matana on all four kronos hamizbeach, but the one that's critical is the first of the four matanos. And if he has shalol lishma in that matana, then the carbon would be possible, or ola l'mayla sheikho vaso. But if he had machshavas l'shma in the first matana, carbon is kosher. He cannot possibly invalidate the carbon with a machshavas shalol l'shma post zrika, because at that point the carbon is kosher. When the carbon needs the avoda, call it X, in order to be a carbon kosher, then shalol l'shma passes the carbon. But if I don't even need that avoda, and the carbon is already kosher, i.e. matana richona, then the carbon is kosher. We don't say the shalol l'shma will retroactively invalidate the carbon. But he points out that there are two types of karbanos. There are 99% of the karbanos which are brought on the outer mizbeach. But with regard to a very slim picking, a very select group of karbanos where the avoda is done in the mizbeach hapnimi, like a chatos pnimis, then in such a case, a machshava shalol l'shma passes all the avodas, all the matanos. Because with regard to this Mizbeach HaPnimi, there's no leniency, no fallback position of matana richon. All the matanos are equal, they're all critical. Now what's here? Did we get up to Taf Nun Vav yet? Let me just see. No. Okay. Now we have another issue. What's the issue now? That above and beyond Chatos and Pesach, where Shalol Shma passes the carbon, completely passes the carbon, we also have an issue about a carbon Osham. And to a large extent, Osham and Chatos are guided by the same rules. In general, I mean, forget about L'Shma and Shalol, because both are karbonos that were generated by a chet. So now he quotes the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, she'af ha'osham kechatos b'nifsal b'shinui kodesh v'shinui bayla. So if his machshava of l'shem zevach l'shem zoveach was shalol l'shma, it passes a carbon osham to the same extent that it passes a carbon chatos. So says Rabbi Eliezer. So if we talk about a carbon shlomin, you see, there's only one carbon left, one category left, that's shlomin, because we've already covered. No. What am I talking about? We didn't cover ola. Let's say he had a machshava l'shem chatos in a carbon ola. Then the carbon would be kosher el shlo ola l'baylim l'shem chova. If the ola was a carbon chova. So leaving Pesach on the side, when we get to the four categories of karbonos, which would be ola, chatas, osham, and shlomin, then Rabbi Eliezer is adding osham to the category of chatas with regard to the halacha of machshava Shalolishma poselis. Ben Azai disagrees. Afa ola nifsels machsheva shalolishma. Just 1 second. What's the difference between Ben Azai and Rabbi Eliezer? 1 second. Oh, I see. Sorry, ola. Wow. So Ben Azai is extending the psul of Shalol Lishma that we've established in Chatos and in Asham, according to Rabbi Eliezer. He, Ben Azai, is extending it to an Ola. I mean, all you're left with is Shlom. And Yossi ben Chuni is of the opinion shebechol hakarbanos imchishe bahem l'shem Pesach or l'shem Chatos dulim. Interesting. Until now, we were talking about Shalol L'Shma in a carbon Pesach or in a carbon Chatos. Now we're talking about other karbanos in which he had a machshava l'shem Pesach or l'shem Chatos. We're on the other side of the river now. And according to Yossi, all those karbanos in Shalol L'Shma, if it was l'shem Chatos or l'shem Pesach, are possible. And the impression you get is that would apply even to a shlom, because he says kol karbanos. So there's a machshav of Shalol L'Shma that poseles b'shlamim, according to Yossi ben Choni. And in what case? Where he had a machshav in shlamim l'shem Pesach or l'shem Chatos. And finally, we have the sheet of Shimon Achi Azaria. And that's Nomuch L'Shem Gavoa, Ein Zu Machshava Posel. But Gavoa L'Shem Nomuch is HaKorban Nifsal Likim. This is like an application of the rule of Ma'ila V'Kodesh V'Ein Morid. So we have different levels of karbanos, like a pyramid, a hierarchy. And we have a gavoa and a nob, that which is high on the pyramid and that which is lower on the pyramid. So this is Sugya Tzvakim on Daf Yud Zayin, on Daf Yud Aleph, sorry. So I'm trying to see if he fleshes out what is considered Namach, what's considered Gavoa. I mean, I have my own intuition, but I was hoping. So that's footnote number Taf Nun Ches. To explain Shimon Achi Azari. You know what? I'm looking at the clock. I think we'll pick this up tomorrow because I see this is a very profound sugya. To break down the karbanos into a hierarchy of gavoa and nob. And he's going to touch on Kodshim as opposed to Kodshim Kalin. I mean, that sounds like a very, very exciting limud. So we'll leave that for tomorrow. Just make a note of it here. Okay.